The worst lies aren't the ones people tell with their mouths. They're the ones they repeat until an entire neighborhood forgets what the truth sounds like. The pounding on my front door came at exactly 5:42 on a chilly Tuesday morning. Not a polite knock. The kind that rattles the glass panels and sends a jolt straight through your chest before you're even fully awake. Duke lifted his head from the rug beside my bed, ears twitching once, then looked at me with calm amber eyes. He didn't bark. He never did unless someone was standing right on top of us. I pulled on yesterday's jeans and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor, the cool planks biting into my feet. The smell of fresh coffee from the automatic brewer had just started drifting through the hallway when another series of violent knocks echoed through the house. Nathan Brooks. Open this door. I recognized the voice instantly. Brenda Whitmore, HOA president, professional real estate agent, self-appointed queen of Willow Creek Estates. By the time I unlocked the deadbolt, I could already hear the quiet hum of 2 patrol cars idling at the curb. Their red and blue lights reflected across the dew-covered lawns like ripples on a lake before sunrise. Standing beside Brenda were 2 police officers. She clutched a thick manila folder against her perfectly pressed cream-colored blazer. Even from the doorway, I could smell the sharp mix of expensive perfume and fresh hairspray. Her smile wasn't the kind that greeted neighbors. It was the smile of someone convinced she'd finally won. There he is, she announced before I said a single word. The man whose dog has been terrorizing this neighborhood for months. One officer offered me a calm nod. Morning, sir. We've received multiple complaints regarding excessive barking throughout the night. I blinked, then looked down. Duke had quietly walked beside my leg and sat perfectly still, tail resting on the floor without making a sound. Brenda pointed dramatically toward him. That's the animal. Animal. Not dog. Not pet. Animal. As if reducing him to a problem somehow made her accusation sound more official. She opened the folder with theatrical precision, revealing printed photographs, handwritten complaints, and pages of HOA violation notices clipped neatly together. I've documented everything, she declared. The barking starts around 1 every morning and doesn't stop until almost 4. Children can't sleep. Elderly residents are exhausted. Property values are suffering. Property values. In Willow Creek, those 2 words carried more weight than almost anything else. The younger officer glanced toward Duke again. My German shepherd simply yawned. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from the landscaping crew working 3 streets over. Somewhere behind the houses a sprinkler hissed softly. Birds hopped across my driveway without the slightest concern. Everything around us felt peaceful. Everything except Brenda. She looked almost excited, like she'd rehearsed this performance in front of a mirror. I've already contacted animal control, she continued. The HOA board is holding an emergency hearing tonight. Frankly, this dog shouldn't still be living here. My fingers curled tighter around the edge of the doorframe, but I kept my voice steady. Officer, has anyone actually heard him bark today? The older officer looked from me to Duke, then back toward Brenda. No, sir. Yesterday. He hesitated. No. For the first time, a tiny crack appeared beneath Brenda's polished confidence. It lasted less than a second. Then she smiled again. Oh, don't worry, she said sweetly. You won't be able to talk your way out of this. She raised one perfectly manicured finger and pointed across the street. My security cameras recorded everything. She believed those cameras would destroy me. What she didn't know, they had already recorded the only witness that mattered. And it wasn't my dog. People always assume a quiet house hides a lonely man. They're usually right. What they never expect is that sometimes the quietest house on the street is also the one telling the truth. My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 38 years old, and until 2 years ago, I never imagined I'd be living alone in a 3-bedroom house with only a German shepherd for company. Cancer doesn't ask whether you're ready. One day, my wife Emily was arguing with me about whether we should repaint the kitchen cabinets. 8 months later, I was standing beside a polished oak casket trying to remember what her laugh sounded like without hearing it break halfway through chemotherapy. The silence afterward was unbearable. Friends visited. Family called. Neighbors brought casseroles. Then life moved on. Mine didn't. Duke changed that. He wasn't just a dog. He was a retired working-line German shepherd that a K9 trainer I knew could no longer keep after relocating across the country. 4 years old. Disciplined. Intelligent. The kind of dog that studied people before deciding whether they deserved his attention. The first night he slept in my house, he didn't climb onto the furniture. He curled up beside the front door instead, as if he'd already decided protecting me was his new job. That became our routine. Every morning at 6, the soft click of his nails crossed the hardwood floor before I even opened my eyes. Coffee brewed while he waited patiently beside the back door. We'd walk the same trail circling Willow Creek Lake, where mist floated over the water and the smell of wet pine mixed with fresh-cut grass. People always smiled when they saw Duke. Kids asked if they could pet him. Retired veterans stopped to talk about dogs they'd owned years ago. Even the mail carrier carried treats in her pocket. The only person who seemed bothered by his existence was Brenda Whitmore. Willow Creek Estates looked perfect in every real estate brochure. Matching mailboxes, fresh mulch around every tree, lawns trimmed with military precision. The clubhouse flew a giant American flag every morning at sunrise, and every Saturday, someone pressure-washed sidewalks that already looked spotless. It wasn't really a neighborhood. It was a carefully maintained performance. Brenda loved that performance more than anyone. She drove a white Mercedes GLE that somehow always looked freshly detailed. Every Tuesday morning she'd cruise through the subdivision at barely 10 miles an hour, sunglasses on even when clouds covered the sky, searching for violations the way birdwatchers searched for rare species. Grass, too tall. Holiday decorations one day late. Trash cans visible from the street. She carried a clipboard everywhere. No one had ever actually seen her enjoy living there. She simply managed it. The first time we met, I'd just finished replacing a section of my backyard fence after a spring storm knocked it down. Duke lay quietly in the shade, chewing on an old tennis ball. Brenda didn't introduce herself. She didn't welcome me to the neighborhood. She looked at Duke for exactly 3 seconds before saying, "German Shepherds make some people nervous." I smiled politely, only if they give him a reason. Her smile froze just long enough for me to notice. "I hope you'll be a responsible pet owner." Then she turned around and walked away without another word. I remember watching her expensive heels click across the concrete sidewalk while Duke rested his head back on his paws, completely uninterested. Looking back now, that conversation wasn't a warning. It was the opening move. I just didn't realize she'd already decided my dog was going to become the villain in a story she intended to write herself. The funny thing about lies is that they need constant maintenance. Truth doesn't. It simply waits. Brenda didn't stop after that first confrontation on my driveway. If anything, seeing 2 police officers leave without taking Duke seemed to irritate her even more. 3 days later, I found the first violation notice taped neatly to my mailbox. Noise disturbance. $40 fine. The paper still smelled like fresh toner, as if she'd printed it minutes before walking across the street. According to the report, Duke had barked continuously from 2:17 a.m. until 3:48 a.m. the previous night. I actually laughed, because I hadn't even been home. I'd worked an overnight emergency electrical repair at St. Mary's Hospital, and Duke had spent the entire evening at Riverside Canine Boarding. The receipt was still sitting on my kitchen counter. I emailed the proof to the HOA office. 2 days later, another violation arrived. Then another. Different dates. Different times. Always between midnight and 4 in the morning. Always signed by Brenda Whitmore. Soon the complaints spread. Beyond paperwork, walking Duke became different. Mrs. Henderson, who normally waved from her porch every morning, suddenly looked away when we passed. A father pulled his little daughter closer after spotting Duke across the sidewalk. Someone removed the bowl of dog treats from the local mailbox. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with anonymous posts. Dangerous dog in Willow Creek. Sleepless nights because of irresponsible owners. How long before someone gets bitten? No names. They didn't need names. Everyone already knew who they were talking about. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped at the neighborhood mailbox cluster and found 3 people standing beside the community bulletin board. The conversation ended the second I walked up. You could almost hear the silence. One man cleared his throat. Another suddenly became fascinated with checking his mail. Brenda, standing in the middle with her clipboard tucked under one arm, offered me that same polished realtor smile. "Oh, Nathan." She spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I hope Duke's feeling calmer this week." I looked down. Duke sat perfectly beside my leg without pulling on the leash. A squirrel darted across the parking lot only 20 feet away. He watched it. Didn't move. Didn't bark. Didn't even stand up. The older gentleman beside Brenda frowned. I've never actually heard him bark. Brenda answered before I could. That's because you're asleep before the trouble starts. She said it so confidently that even the old man nodded as though she'd reminded him of something he'd forgotten. That was her real talent. Not lying. Convincing everyone else they remembered the same lie. A week later, animal control pulled into my driveway. The diesel engine rumbled softly while two officers stepped out carrying clipboards. The younger officer scratched Duke behind the ears within 30 seconds. Honestly, he admitted quietly while reviewing the complaint file, this is probably the calmest shepherd we've seen all month. They inspected the yard, checked his vaccination records, watched him obey every command I gave without hesitation. Sit, stay, down, come, heel. The inspection lasted nearly 40 minutes. When they left, no citations were issued. I figured common sense had finally won. I underestimated Brenda. By Monday morning, she'd already adapted. If animal control couldn't label Duke dangerous, she'd make him unbearable. The next HOA newsletter included an entire section titled Excessive Pet Noise and Community Safety. No names, just enough details for everyone to know exactly whose house it referenced. That evening, while watering the flower beds Emily had planted years earlier, I noticed something strange across the street. Brenda wasn't looking at my house. She was looking at one of the black security cameras mounted beneath her roofline. Then she smiled. Not the fake smile she used during HOA meetings. This one was different. Satisfied. Like someone who had just remembered they already possessed the perfect weapon. At the time, I thought she was planning her next complaint. I had no idea she was also preserving the evidence that would eventually destroy every single one of them. There comes a moment when you realize you're no longer defending yourself against accusations. You're defending yourself against a story that's already been accepted as fact. The emergency HOA hearing was scheduled for Thursday evening, 7 o'clock. Community clubhouse. Attendance strongly encouraged. The email arrived in my inbox with the kind of cheerful professionalism only homeowners associations could manage. Agenda Item 4. Ongoing community safety concerns regarding excessive canine noise. They never used my name. They didn't have to. By then, everyone knew exactly who Agenda Item 4 was. I clipped Duke's leash onto his collar before leaving the house. The metal clasp gave its familiar click, and he looked up at me with the same calm expression he wore every morning. As always, he waited until I opened the front door before stepping outside. Across the street, Brenda was already loading binders into the trunk of her Mercedes. She noticed me immediately, then smiled. Not because she was happy, because she believed the evening belonged to her. The clubhouse buzzed with quiet conversations when I walked inside. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and lemon furniture polish. Folding chairs filled the room in neat rows, and nearly every seat was occupied. Conversation stopped as I entered. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. A few neighbors avoided eye contact. Others watched me with cautious curiosity, as though trying to decide whether the rumors matched the man standing in front of them. I took a seat in the last row. Brenda sat near the front beside the HOA board. Her binders were stacked perfectly. Color-coded tabs, printed photographs, highlighted reports. She looked less like a volunteer board president and more like a prosecutor preparing for trial. When the meeting reached Agenda Item 4, she stood confidently. Ladies and gentlemen, she began. This has gone on long enough. She clicked a remote. A projector illuminated the wall behind her. Violation notices appeared one after another. Dates, times, complaint numbers, highlighted sections. Each page made the situation seem larger than the one before it. We've documented repeated disturbances over the past several weeks. She paused dramatically. Many residents no longer sleep through the night. Heads nodded around the room. Then came the witness statements. One neighbor claimed the barking sounded aggressive. Another described hearing it almost every evening. A third insisted it frightened children walking home from the park. I recognized several names. People who had always smiled at me before. People who had never once mentioned hearing Duke bark. The board president leaned toward me. Mr. Brooks, would you like to respond? I stood slowly. Yes. Every eye followed me. My dog wasn't even home on several of the dates listed. Silence. I have boarding receipts. A few people exchanged glances. Brenda answered before I could continue. 1 or 2 mistakes don't erase weeks of disruption. 1 or 2 mistakes. She said it so casually. as though false accusations were simple clerical errors. I pulled several documents from my folder. Veterinary records, training certifications, the animal control inspection report showing no violations. The board members accepted the papers politely. They barely looked at them. Brenda's stack was thicker, her presentation louder, her confidence stronger. Facts were competing against certainty, and certainty was winning. Then she delivered the sentence she'd clearly been saving for the end. I believe this board should authorize legal action to remove the animal from the community. The room became painfully quiet. Remove the animal. Not fine me. Not issue another warning. Take Duke away. For the first time since Emily died, I felt something close to panic settling into my chest. Duke wasn't just my dog. He was the last piece of the life I'd fought to rebuild. As neighbors whispered among themselves, I looked through the clubhouse windows toward the street outside. From where I stood, I could see Brenda's house across the parking lot. Beneath the edge of her roof, one small black security camera pointed silently toward the neighborhood. Its tiny green status light blinked once in the darkness. Watching, recording, patiently preserving a version of the truth that no one in this room had seen yet. I spent the next week trying to prove something that should never have required proof in the first place. How do you convince people that something didn't happen? You can't photograph silence. You can't record the absence of a sound. All you can do is keep collecting facts while everyone else keeps collecting opinions. The morning after the HOA meeting, I called the boarding kennel and asked them to email every invoice they'd ever issued for Duke. Within an hour, my inbox held a complete record showing every overnight stay he'd made away from home. I printed everything. Next came his obedience certifications, his veterinary records, the report from animal control, even the training evaluations from the retired K-9 instructor who had entrusted Duke to me. Each document told the same story. Healthy, disciplined, non-aggressive, exceptionally well-trained. I organized the papers into a binder almost as thick as Brenda's. For the first time, I thought I might actually have a chance. I was wrong. The following Monday, another violation notice appeared. This one claimed Duke had barked continuously at 2:43 a.m. I checked the date, then opened my security camera app. At 2:43 that morning, Duke had been asleep on the living room rug. The infrared footage showed him changing positions exactly once before drifting back to sleep. No barking, no pacing, no movement toward the front door. I forwarded the clip to the HOA. Brenda replied less than an hour later. Your camera only covers your property. That was it. One sentence. No acknowledgement of the footage. No explanation. Just another reason why my evidence supposedly wasn't enough. By then I had started noticing a pattern. Every piece of evidence I produced was dismissed for some technical reason. Every accusation Brenda produced was accepted without question. Facts had rules. Rumors didn't. A few evenings later, I walked Duke around Willow Creek Lake just before sunset. The air smelled of damp earth after a brief summer rain. An orange light reflected across the water like liquid copper. Near the fishing pier, an older man waved me over. His name was Walter Jenkins. Quiet, retired engineer. The kind of neighbor who noticed everything but rarely spoke unless it mattered. He scratched Duke gently behind the ears. Hard to believe this fellow's causing all that trouble. I smiled weakly. Apparently he's living a double life while I'm asleep. Walter chuckled, then his expression changed. You know? He hesitated. I've been meaning to ask you something. What is it? He glanced across the lake toward the row of houses where Brenda lived. Has she ever shown you the videos? What videos? The ones she keeps talking about. I frowned. No. Walter nodded slowly. That's interesting. He picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the lake. It seems every time she tells people about your dog, she says her security cameras captured everything. Everything. The word lingered in my mind. I looked across the water. From that distance, I could barely make out Brenda's house, but the small black cameras mounted beneath her roofline caught the last rays of sunlight, tiny squares of glass reflecting gold. Walter continued quietly. My son installed that system for her last year. I turned toward him. It records 24 hours a day. I didn't say anything. It uploads directly to cloud storage. Another pause. Can't really be edited without leaving a trail. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The breeze stirred the tall grass along the shoreline. Somewhere behind us, ducks splashed against the edge of the dock. Then Walter looked directly at me. If your dog really wasn't barking, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. For the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped thinking about how to defend myself. Instead, I started wondering what Brenda's own cameras had been quietly watching while she was busy accusing me. The biggest mistake Brenda ever made wasn't accusing me. It was believing that every camera in the neighborhood worked for her. The next morning, I called an attorney named Rachel Mercer. She specialized in property disputes and civil litigation, but after listening quietly for 20 minutes, she asked only one question. Has anyone besides Brenda actually reviewed the original recordings? No. Not copies. No. Not clips. No. She paused. Then stopped arguing with her. I frowned. What do you mean? You're trying to disprove a story. I heard papers shifting on her desk. I'd rather examine the source. By that afternoon, I was sitting across from her in a modest downtown office that smelled faintly of old books and fresh printer paper. My binder sat between us. She barely opened it. Instead, she wrote 3 words across a yellow legal pad. Original. Video. Metadata. People edit videos, she said. They crop them. They rename them. They slow them down. But cloud systems keep records. I immediately thought of what Walter had told me. 24-hour recording. Cloud storage. Nothing disappears without leaving fingerprints. Rachel leaned back. If Brenda is claiming her cameras prove your dog barked every night, then those same cameras should also prove where your dog actually was every night. The sentence hit me harder than anything I'd heard in weeks. Not because it was complicated, because it was painfully simple. 2 days later, Rachel formally requested preservation of every recording covering the dates listed in Brenda's complaints. Not just the short clips. Everything. Every hour. Every timestamp. Every upload log. Every system record associated with those cameras. The request wasn't accusing Brenda of anything. It simply prevented the files from being deleted. That evening, I walked Duke through the neighborhood, as usual. Nothing looked different. Children rode bicycles. Sprinklers clicked across emerald lawns. Someone grilled hamburgers, and charcoal smoke drifted lazily through the warm summer air. Life continued exactly as it always had. Except now, every house I passed seemed filled with unseen witnesses. Tiny black lenses beneath rooflines. Doorbell cameras. Garage cameras. Motion sensors. Most people installed them to catch thieves. None of them realized they were also recording ordinary truth. 3 days later, Rachel called. Her voice sounded different. Controlled. Careful. Nathan, what happened? We received confirmation. I held my breath. The cloud provider acknowledged the preservation request. So we'll get the footage? Eventually. She hesitated. But something else caught my attention. I waited. Brenda listed very specific times in every complaint. Yes. Down to the minute. Exactly. Rachel tapped something on her keyboard. That tells me she wasn't guessing. My stomach tightened. You think she actually watched the recordings? I think she wants everyone to believe she did. Silence settled between us. Outside my living room window, Duke lay stretched across the porch, watching a pair of robins hopping through Emily's flower beds. Completely peaceful. Rachel spoke again. If those recordings say what she claims, I lose. Yes. And if they don't? Another pause. Then the recordings become your strongest witness. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I feared what the videos might reveal. Because for the first time, I realized the truth no longer depended on memory. Or testimony. Or neighborhood gossip. It was sitting somewhere inside a secure cloud server, quietly waiting for someone to press play. And somewhere inside those countless hours of ordinary footage, I had the strange feeling that the camera hadn't just recorded Duke. It had recorded Brenda, too. Some victories don't begin with a dramatic revelation. They begin with an email. Rachel forwarded it to me at 8:16 on a Monday morning. Evidence preservation confirmed. Data extraction scheduled. I read the message 3 times before setting my phone down. Nothing had been won. Nothing had been proven. But for the first time since Brenda had declared war on Duke, the truth was no longer trapped inside her house. It was on its way into a courtroom. Rachel advised me to do something that felt almost impossible. Don't contact Brenda. Don't respond to the HOA. And don't celebrate. Let them keep talking. That turned out to be the hardest part. Brenda became more confident with every passing day. Another neighborhood email appeared. Another violation notice. Another reminder about community standards. She behaved like someone who believed the verdict had already been written. One afternoon, I watched from my front porch as she walked door to door carrying a stack of neatly folded flyers. She smiled. She laughed. She shook hands with neighbors. Every few minutes, she pointed toward my house. People glanced in my direction before nodding politely. The campaign hadn't ended. It was expanding. Duke rested beside my chair, his head lying across my boots. He followed Brenda with his eyes for a moment. Then he closed them again, completely indifferent. Watching him made me realize something. He had never once reacted to her. Not with fear. Not with aggression. Not even with curiosity. Only people seemed capable of turning ordinary silence into conflict. Later that evening, Rachel called again. The extraction team has finished downloading the footage. I stood up immediately. What did they find? I haven't reviewed everything yet. My heart sank. But she stopped herself. There are over 200 hours of continuous recordings. So nobody selectively recorded anything. I frowned. I don't understand. If Brenda submitted evidence, then somewhere inside those same recordings exists everything she didn't submit. The words settled slowly, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. One clip by itself could be misleading. An entire week couldn't. The following afternoon, I met Rachel at her office. A portable hard drive sat on the conference table. It looked almost disappointingly ordinary. Black plastic. Small blue indicator light. Hundreds of hours of video inside something that fit into the palm of my hand. Rachel connected it to her laptop. Rows of timestamps filled the screen. Every minute. Every hour. Every night Brenda had listed in her complaints. No missing gaps. No overwritten files. Cloud synchronization logs appeared beside each recording. Everything matched. Nothing had been altered. Rachel smiled slightly. That's exactly what we wanted. She opened one of the complaint dates. 2:17 a.m. The camera overlooked Brenda's driveway, part of the street, and enough of my front yard to clearly see my porch. The video began playing. No sound yet. Just quiet darkness. Streetlights glowing softly against empty pavement. Tree branches swaying in a light breeze. My porch remained completely still. A faint shape appeared through my front window. Duke, curled up on the living room rug exactly where my own security footage had shown him. Rachel paused the video. We're going to review everything carefully. I nodded. She resumed playback. Minute after minute passed. Nothing happened. No barking. No movement. No disturbance. Just an ordinary neighborhood sleeping peacefully beneath the streetlights. Then, at exactly 2:41 a.m., something entered the frame. Not from my yard. Not from my porch. From Brenda's own property. Rachel reached for the space bar, freezing the image before I could fully process what I'd seen. She looked at me. I think. She zoomed in slowly. We just found the beginning of your case. On the screen, illuminated by Brenda's own security lights, was the unmistakable outline of a large husky stepping out through the gate beside her garage. And 20 feet away, my house remained completely dark. So did Duke. Truth doesn't always arrive with a confession. Sometimes it arrives frame by frame. Rachel and I spent the next 2 days reviewing footage that no one else in Willow Creek had bothered to watch from beginning to end. It wasn't exciting. Mostly empty streets. Passing headlights. Raccoons wandering across. Lawns. Sprinklers switching on before dawn. Hours of ordinary life. And that's exactly why it was impossible to fake. Every timestamp matched. Every weather change lined up with official records. Every sunrise arrived exactly when it should. The recordings weren't telling a story. They were simply preserving reality. On the fourth complaint date, we found it again. 2:41 a.m. Brenda's side gate opened. Out trotted a gray and white Siberian husky. Its tail wagged as it wandered into her front yard. Seconds later, the dog threw back its head. Even with the audio muted, I knew what was coming. Rachel turned the volume up. A long, piercing howl echoed through the conference room. Then another. And another. Not a bark. Not from Duke. A husky's unmistakable midnight song. The sound continued for nearly 3 minutes. My house remained dark. Duke never appeared. Rachel paused the video. Let's keep going. We did. At 2:46 a.m., Brenda stepped outside wearing a robe and slippers. Instead of bringing the dog inside, she stood beside it, watching, waiting, almost as if she wanted the noise to continue. The husky howled again. Brenda looked toward my house, then back at her dog. She finally clipped on a leash and walked it inside. I leaned back in my chair. That's enough, isn't it? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, She opened another complaint date. Then another. The same pattern repeated. Different nights. Same husky. Same gate. Same howling. Same dark windows at my house. Then we reached the recording that changed everything. The timestamp read 2:58 a.m. Brenda walked back outside alone. She wasn't carrying the husky anymore. She wasn't looking for it either. Instead, she stood directly beneath one of her security cameras. She pointed toward my house, then raised her phone. The screen illuminated her face with a pale blue glow. She appeared to be speaking while recording herself. No audio reached the security camera from that distance. Only movement. Rachel zoomed in. Brenda repeatedly gestured toward my porch, toward my windows, toward the place where she claimed Duke was supposedly barking. Except nothing was happening. No movement. No sound. Nothing. A few seconds later, she looked at her watch, walked back inside. The street fell silent again. Rachel opened the complaint log. Complaint submitted. 3:07 a.m. exactly 9 minutes after Brenda had finished recording with her phone. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She hadn't simply mistaken the source of the noise. She had created a timeline, watched her own dog howl, ignored it, recorded my silent house, then filed a complaint against mine. Rachel slowly closed the laptop. I don't think this is just an HOA dispute anymore. What is it? She looked directly at me. It's evidence that someone knowingly made repeated false accusations. The next HOA board meeting was already scheduled for Friday evening. Brenda had requested final authorization to pursue legal action against me and permanently remove Duke from Willow Creek. She thought the meeting would be the final chapter. She had no idea Rachel had already submitted copies of every preserved recording to the board's attorney that morning. Not edited clips, not screenshots. Every uninterrupted minute, including the ones Brenda never expected anyone to watch. For weeks, she'd stood in front of the neighborhood, holding a binder full of carefully selected pages. Now an entire hard drive was about to answer back. And unlike Brenda, it didn't care who the HOA president was. Justice doesn't always sound like applause. Sometimes it sounds like absolute silence after the last lie runs out of places to hide. Friday night's HOA meeting filled the clubhouse faster than I'd ever seen before. Word had spread. Nobody knew exactly why, but everyone sensed something unusual was about to happen. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the room again, mixing with the faint scent of floor polish and fresh rain drifting through the open entrance. Conversations buzzed softly until Brenda walked to the front carrying the same thick binder she'd brought to every meeting. She looked completely confident. Perfect blazer, perfect hair, perfect smile. She glanced at me sitting beside Rachel and gave me the smallest nod. The kind someone gives a man they believe is already defeated. When the meeting began, Brenda stood and cleared her throat. Tonight, she announced, I am asking the board to permanently address the ongoing nuisance created by Mr. Brooks' dog. She opened her binder. She never got to read the first page. The HOA attorney rose from his chair. Before we continue, there is additional evidence the board is legally obligated to review. Brenda frowned. What additional evidence? Rachel quietly slid a portable hard drive across the conference table. The complete recordings from your security system. The room became still. Brenda forced a laugh. Those recordings support my complaints. Excellent, the attorney replied. Then this should be very straightforward. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered to life. No edited clips. No dramatic music. Only a timestamp in the upper corner of the screen. 2:41 a.m. Brenda's side gate opened. Her husky walked into the yard. The first long howl echoed through the clubhouse speakers. Several people turned instinctively toward Brenda. The video continued. Another howl. Then another. The attorney fast-forwarded to the next complaint date. Exactly the same. Another night. Another howl. Another quiet house across the street. Another sleeping German shepherd visible through my living room window. No barking. No movement. Only silence. Then came the recording Rachel had shown me 2 days earlier. Brenda stepping outside, looking toward my house, holding up her phone, recording. 9 minutes later, the HOA complaint timestamp appeared beside the video. One resident gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." No one spoke after that. There was nothing left to argue. The attorney closed the video. For the record, he said calmly, every complaint submitted by Mrs. Whitmore corresponds with recordings that contradict her written statements. Brenda's face had gone completely pale. She opened her binder again, closed it, looked around the room as if searching for someone willing to rescue her. Nobody moved. The board president slowly removed his nameplate from in front of her seat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, "you're relieved of your duties effective immediately pending further legal review." The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouting ever could. Within 2 weeks, every violation issued against me was withdrawn. The board issued a written apology. Animal Control formally closed its file. The HOA reimbursed my legal expenses. Brenda quietly listed her house for sale before the end of the summer. I never saw her again. Life returned to what it had always been. Every morning, Duke's nails clicked softly across the hardwood floor before sunrise. We walked around Willow Creek Lake while mist floated above the water. Children once again asked if they could pet him. The mail carrier started carrying treats in her pocket again. Nothing about Duke had changed. Only the story people believed about him. Sometimes, while passing Brenda's old house, I'd noticed the empty brackets where her security cameras used to hang. The hardware had been removed. The holes remained. Tiny reminders that the truth had been there from the very beginning, waiting patiently behind a lens. People often ask me how I finally beat the HOA president. I always give the same answer. I didn't. Her own camera did. Because justice isn't loud. It's patient. It's precise. And sooner or later, it records everything.